You know when you click buy on a stock, have you ever really thought about where that money goes? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the Canadian stock market. It's this whole ecosystem where fortunes are made, from the tiniest startups to absolute global giants. So let's dive right in.
Okay, so just to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, the Canadian stock market is valued at a mind-blowing 3.5 trillion US dollars. Yeah, trillion with a T. That's just a massive amount of capital. And really, it's the engine that's powering everything from your local coffee shop all the way up to the biggest companies in the country.
So, the big question is, where does all this trading actually happen? I mean, you might be picturing one of those giant, chaotic trading floors you see in the movies, right? But the reality? It's actually way more interesting than that.
See, Canada's market is actually made up of 4 major exchanges, and each one has its own unique personality. The best way to think about it, I find, is like a growth ladder. A company can start out on the bottom rung, and if they do well, they can literally climb their way to the very top. So, let's start at the bottom of that ladder and see how it works.
All right, so first up, let's talk about the launch pad. This is ground zero. It's where all the new, emerging, and often super high-growth companies get their start and their first real taste of public money.
So at the very bottom of this ladder, we've got 2 main junior exchanges. First, there's the Canadian Securities Exchange, the CSE. You can kind of think of this as the Wild West. It's where you'll find those really early-stage, super speculative companies in cutting-edge fields like fintech. Then you've got the TSX Venture Exchange, the TSXV. This one's a little more structured. It's more of a formal launch pad for companies, especially in sectors like mining and tech that have their eyes set on the big leagues.
Okay, so once a company has proven itself on one of those junior exchanges, what's next? Well, now we're moving up the ladder. The successful ones, they look to graduate to the majors, and that means heading to the very pinnacle of the Canadian market, the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Yeah, the TSX, this is the big leagues for sure. This is home to Canada's largest, most established companies. We're talking about the blue chips. I mean, it's a top 10 exchange globally, and getting listed here is no joke. The requirements are incredibly strict. You need to have a huge market cap, you have to be profitable, and that's exactly why it's such a magnet for big-time investors who are looking for stability.
And believe me, making that jump from the TSX Venture up to the main TSX, that is a huge deal for a company. It's exactly like a baseball player getting called up from the minors to the major leagues. It sends a clear signal to the entire world that this company has officially arrived. They're ready to play with the big boys now.
So you might be asking, how does a company actually climb this ladder? Well, it all starts on the TSXV. From there, they have to work their absolute tails off to grow the business and hit some really serious financial milestones. And then, only if they're good enough, they can apply to graduate to the TSX. It's a really tough climb, no doubt about it, but you better believe the view from the top is worth it.
Okay, so we have this neat ladder, right? But what if a company doesn't really fit onto that path? Well, this is where it gets interesting, because there's another major player in this whole ecosystem, and that's Cboe Canada. They aren't really part of that graduation path. Instead, they operate as more of a unique specialist, a real innovator, bringing totally different kinds of products to the market.
And don't underestimate them. Cboe Canada is a major player. We're talking about them handling almost 15% of all stock trades in the entire country. So how do they get so big? Simple. By being innovators and, just doing things a little differently.
Okay, check this out. One of Cboe Canada's absolute coolest innovations is something called a CDR, or a Canadian Depository Receipt. So, have you ever wanted to invest in a massive US company, like an Apple or a Tesla, but you just didn't want to deal with the headache of converting your money to US dollars and all the fees? Well, CDRs solve that exact problem. They actually let you buy into these US giants using your Canadian dollars. It is a total game changer for Canadian investors.
All right, so we've met all the players in the game. We've got the TSX, the TSXV, the CSE, and Cboe Canada. Now, let's bring it all together. The big question is, how do you, as an investor, use this knowledge to choose the right playing field and actually align your strategy with your personal goals?
Well, I think there's no better way to figure that out than to see them all laid out side by side. So let's put them head to head.
Okay, let's break this down. So, if you're looking for stability for those solid blue chip companies, the TSX is your go-to. That's where you find the big banks, the major energy companies. Now, if you're feeling a bit more adventurous, looking for higher risk but potentially higher reward, then the TSXV and the CSE are where you'll find those up-and-coming tech and biotech companies. And finally, if you're interested in more specialized products like ETFs or those CDRs we talked about, then Cboe Canada is definitely the place to be. You can see each exchange really has its own distinct flavor.
So, what's the bottom line here? It really just comes down to your personal investment style. Are you a slow and steady wins the race kind of investor? Then the big, established companies on the TSX are probably your best bet. But if you're more of a thrill seeker, someone who's looking for that next big thing, that potential 10-bagger, then you're probably going to want to explore the emerging companies on the TSXV and CSE.
Look, understanding this whole ecosystem, the ladder, the different players and what they're all for, that's really the first crucial step to becoming a smarter, more informed investor. It really empowers you to make better decisions that actually align up with your own financial goals. So, now that you know the playing field, the question is, what's your next move?